start by going over the bellwork. When it comes to the battles of Trenton and Princeton, were they these huge military victories that are going to like define the war? Probably not. There's smaller regiments that Washington's army is beating, but those are wins nonetheless. And really the major point right now is not winning it right away, right? We're here all day. This is where we live. We'll continue to fight as long as we need to. The British are the ones that are being, taken from their homes and having to fight for something that they don't really even believe in. So as long as the Americans are literally living to fight another day, they're getting closer and closer to kind of wearing the British down. So no, these weren't huge wins, but they're wins, and they give us hope that, hey, we might be able to do this thing. So they definitely are going to help the morale of the soldiers. The soldiers are totally going to feel like, hey, we might actually have a chance to do this thing. But another thing it does is Washington, who has not been very successful up to this point, has proven himself. Because even if they aren't huge battles, he did use some strategy, right? He went by night, snuck his whole army literally right under the noses of the British. They were 30 yards away from them at one point. He wins 2 battles back to back. It definitely feels like he's got the momentum. So now they're ready to retreat, but not retreat, but settle down into Morristown, New Jersey, where they are going to wait the winter out, kind of recoup with this renewed faith in the process. Everybody's, for the most part, has re-enlisted. And they are going to have all the supplies that they stole from the Hessians. So it's a good situation for the Americans. Saratoga is going to be considered a turning point in the war. Because even though Trenton's great and it definitely helps morale, as far as on the world stage, it didn't mean that much. And this is what I mean by that. It's now the spring of 1777. We're ready to get the battles back going. And Ben Franklin is in France right now. He's one of our diplomats that is kind of stationed in France. And his main goal is he's trying to gain support from the French to help us win this. Now, you remember the French have been giving us money. They've been giving us money and supplies, but it's kind of been low key. They don't want to announce to the world yet that they're backing the Americans, because then they're going to find themselves in yet another war with Britain. And they don't really want that at this point. They would like to see the colonists be independent, but they're not going to back a team that they don't think has a chance of winning, right? If a middle school basketball team was going to play the LA Lakers, I'm not going to, put my money on the 8th grade team. So they have to prove themselves. And basically that's what France is saying. You guys have to prove that you can actually win. Because, yeah, you won in Trenton, but you have way more losses than you do wins. So basically we got to prove ourselves to France for France to go all in and actually send troops and support and kind of the full force of their army. But the British have been impacted by this whole Trenton situation. So they are devising this plan. They want to get this war over quickly. So they're coming up with a new strategy. And that new strategy is they want to cut off the New England colonies, and they're going to let John Burgoyne lead this. They want to take the city of Albany, New York, because Albany, New York sits along the Hudson River. And the Hudson River is a extremely prosperous and busy kind of trading river. There's a lot of commerce that goes on. It's a big deal. So you control the Hudson, you control New England. That's kind of the strategy going in here. And they want to cut the snake's head off, basically. They have this idea that most of the patriots are concentrated in those New England colonies. They just call it New England, but it's that Vermont area, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. Obviously, it spills over a little bit into New York, but they do feel, for the most part, that New York is more loyal to Britain. So they feel that taking the Hudson will be demoralizing to the colonies. It'll help cut off the rebellious colonies of New England. And then they'll just be able to focus everything in New England, squash the rebellion, and they'll be out of here by winter. The problem is the people that come up with this plan that I'm about to share with you didn't even ever visit the American colonies. They make decisions over in Britain, and they tell their soldiers to do it. Okay, I need you to talk. But listen, I need you to tell Daddy, okay? Mommy is teaching. Hey, Rye. Wake Daddy up. What? I need you to get them, please.
Let Daddy help.
Can't wake up. All right, so
over here.
These people over in Britain are making this decision. They come up with this three-pronged attack, which ideally sounds like a good idea. And you're seeing the animation here where pretty much you're going to be sending, and that's the answer in the in your notes is 3. You're going to send a regiment, which is going to be Burgoynes, from the north up in Canada down to Albany, because Albany is your goal. You want to take over Albany. You're going to take General Howe. He's going to come from the south up to Albany. And then you're going to have another regiment coming from St. Ledger is the head of that regiment. And he's going to make his way from the west. And they're all going to meet. Timing-wise should work out in Albany and take the city. But you guys can see in the animation here that as this St. Ledger, the 3rd regiment that's supposed to come from the west, he gets stopped at Fort Stanwix by Benedict Arnold. And Benedict Arnold's forces are going to force this regiment to retreat. So that regiment's out of the picture now. They will not make it to Albany. But the other 2 are on their way. So Burgoyne's going to be our main focus here because he's going to be the general that makes it to Saratoga, the British general that makes it to the Battle of Saratoga. So you can see his route was that northern route, and he's coming in from Canada. He's gonna go down Lake Champlain, and then cross over to get into the Hudson River, where he's then gonna make it right into Albany, meet up with his guys, take the city. But there is one obstacle in the way, and it's Fort Ticonderoga. And Fort Ticonderoga sound familiar to you because it is the first fort that we took over from the British at the beginning of the war. During Lexington and Concord, when we go, the Green Mountain Boys, they take over Fort Ticonderoga. And that's where we get the cannons that we need to, fight in Bunker Hill and the Siege of Boston. So this is like a really kind of near and dear fort to the Americans, not only because of strategic placing, it's also just kind of this moral standing that we've got. So we have sent 2,000 heavily armed Americans to protect this fort. And they are in charge. The commander at the time, for my Hamilton fans, is actually Eliza and Angelica and Peggy's father, Philip Schuyler. So he's the one that's kind of in command, and he is definitely going to be criticized for his decisions. So you've got Burgoyne, this British general. Rather than just trying to sail past the fort, which is set up to be able to attack any enemy ships that come down, he decides to unload all of his troops and things, and they're going to kind of hide up in this Mount Defiance, which is a hill that is a high ground pointing down at the fort. He does a Washington and does it in the middle of the night, undetected. When dawn breaks, the Americans wake up, they look up, and they are surrounded on 2 sides. There's really only 2 options that you have, and that's the decision that you guys have to make. right now if you're a soldier. So soldiers, get your guided notes up. Or not guided notes, sorry, your Google form. And this is the scenario that you're in.
Soldiers, you wake up. Form. I'm going to put that in the chat.
You wake up, you are surrounded, hundreds of cannons facing your fort. What are you going to do? Are you going to listen to your officer? Skylar commands that everybody retreat, grab what you can supply-wise, and we got to get out of here. Or we're going to aim our cannons right back at Mount Defiance and start to battle. Because you don't want that on your hands that you lost this fort. So put it in your form, what decision you're going to make. And also put it in the chat. If you're not active in the chat at all today, we're going to put you down as absent.
Exactly.
That's fine, Lonnie. I'm just saying in general. But you can make the decision if you want to. If you want to act as a soldier, what would you do? All right. Braylon's going to fight back. Jaden, retreat. Got some more that are going to fight back. Any other soldiers? All right, so I'm going to give you guys some bad news. Both options are pretty crappy. If you choose to listen to your officers and retreat, that's actually what's going to happen. Retreating is embarrassing, especially when you just lost the fort that everybody in the colonies thinks is untakeable. You're completely caught off guard. This is like hits at your soul. You are able to capture or take some of your supplies though. So it actually was a little bit of a better decision to listen, take your stuff, and retreat. Because if you chose to stand and fight, as noble as that is, you're going to have to retreat anyways because you're completely overwhelmed. Remember, he's got over 7,000 soldiers. You have 2,000. Completely outmanned. You lose a little bit more if you made this decision. It was a lose-lose situation, but I don't want you to think that these guys are cowards because they do make up for it later on down the road. So if you're filling in the guided notes, this is what you're putting in your sheet. What really happened at Fort Ticonderoga is it's swiftly abandoned. Skylar makes the call to retreat, get what you can, and we got to go. But it's a little more organized when you decide to retreat rather than when you're ran off the field or ran out of the fort. But when the king hears about the British taking back Fort Ticonderoga, he literally is basically like, all right, we did it. We won. I've beaten them. I've beaten the rebels. We took back the fort. Yeah, maybe there's that little, hiccup in Trenton, but we did it. And remember, he hears about everything like a month and a half after it actually happens. So he's pretty high for a little bit, and then you'll see. So Burgoyne has enacted the first part of his plan. He got past Fort Ticonderoga, took the fort. Now he's got to make the trek about 23 to 30 miles through straight wilderness so he can get to the Hudson River, which will take him to Albany, New York. So you can see in this map, here's Fort Ticonderoga. And this is going to be the trail that he takes. He meant to get to Albany. He's going to get stopped here. But either way, the important part that you need to know is he's going to get really criticized for the decision to go through the wilderness. Because remember, he doesn't know the terrain. That's a big downfall of the British. They don't really know what's out there. And you know what's out there? A bunch of militiamen and a bunch of people that don't want them to be there, as well as all the dangers of being in the woods. He's going to actually go to court after the war because he ends up having to surrender, we'll see. because of this decision. A lot of people believe he should have taken Lake George, which gets you close to the mouth of the Hudson and the Potomac, and then he would have been able to easily get to Albany. But he knew that he didn't have enough resources, he didn't have enough boats, and that would take a long time. So he takes the wilderness. We're talking crossing rivers, trudging through swamps, forests. Not a fun time. This is part of your notes. He is going to hire an Iroquois guide that's going to help guide the army because this is their land. They know the land. But one problem when he's making the decision that he's going to go through the wilderness, and this is something that the British completely guess incorrectly. He believes that there's a ton of loyalists in New York. They really think that all the rebels are in New England and that they're not going to have to worry about any resistance because they're going to have tons of people that support them around. But that's not the case. And they're going to learn that the hard way. So they hire the Iroquois to help them get through the wilderness. Remember those patriots that retreated? Realized that he was going to go the wilderness path. They begin to make that trip as difficult as humanly possible. They start cutting down trees and moving them into the roads and into the paths that the army would take. They were burning bridges so they couldn't just take their wagons right through, so they'd have to go through down into the swamps and the rivers and stuff. They tried to make it as difficult as possible. And this has a kind of dual impact because also when you are making it harder to get through, you're cutting off an army supply line. At this time of warfare, we didn't have, big, tanks or whatever we need to be able to bring supplies to our troops. Airplanes, motor vehicles, we don't have that. So you'd have to have these supply lines that had clear lines to the fort, to the fortifications that you were getting all your resources. And the further that Burgoyne gets away from Canada, the further he is away from his supply lines, which makes it even more difficult. And that this trip is taking a lot longer than he thought it would, and he needs those supplies. So he gets some bad intel from some probably pretty savvy spies that there is a nearby town called Bennington that has horses, supplies, tons of things that they need. And it's barely guarded. And he thinks that it's a bunch of loyalists that live around here. So he sends just a decently small group of about 1,000 Hessians, some of his officers, and a couple British soldiers to head down to Bennington and seize horses, supplies, anything they need. And he's going to assume this is going to be a walk in the park, literally. But because he miscalculates how much militia is really in New York and in this area, they capture the Hessians. They're using that guerrilla-style warfare where they're hiding behind trees. They're got some marksmen that are literally taking out officers. And by the time that this battle ends, Burgoyne has lost between 800 and 1,000 of his men. So like I said, they use that guerrilla-style warfare as they're going. They're taking off officers as they make their way through. And when you take away officers, regular soldiers, your regular everyday soldier, if you were a good soldier, you were promoted to a higher rank. So if you just have a bunch of regular soldiers with no commanders, that's going to be a little bit of chaos. They're going to get scared, and then they surrender. Now, the British are so angry at this. Like, this like boils Cornwallis's blood that Americans target commanders. They don't think that that's the right way to enact in war. So the overall outcome of this battle is going to be that Burgoyne is not going to get the supplies that he needs. He's still in the same boat that he was, except now he's just basically lost another 1,000 men. His supply lines continue to weaken, especially as the Patriots make it harder and harder for those supplies to get to him. And then this is going to, and this is in your notes, this is going to impact his next decision. He knows that winter is coming. He doesn't have the supplies he needs. He has to get to Albany, and he has to get there quickly. If he doesn't get, when he gets to Albany, he knows he'll have resources. They'll take the city because Howe and Ledger are going to be there. We're going to be able to take the city easily, and then we'll have all the resources we need. The colonists will quarter us. But the problem is General Howe kind of changed the course of his decision. He decides, Burgoyne can handle it because he doesn't know that Burgoyne's struggling. So he changes course a bit. And to his credit, Howe does try to let Burgoyne know that he's not going to go to Albany by using this, and this is one of this artifact is always brought up when you talk about Saratoga, because it's one of the more cool ways that spies would communicate, because it's just very well thought out. So these would be masked letters, to where this letter here makes sense, but it's incorrect information. So it's supposed to throw, in case it were to get, picked up by the enemy, they would have wrong intel because the letter makes sense when you just read it this way, but it's incorrect. That's not really what's happening. But when you place the mask over it, this is the true information. So it's hard because you have to kind of time it up, and space it out to where it makes sense if you just read it straight up and it throws the enemy off. But if you use the key, the person that you're giving the correspondence to that has the key knows what you're doing. So this message was supposed to warn Burgoyne that Howe is not going to make it. Could have impacted Burgoyne's decision because Burgoyne probably would have made his way back up to Canada because he knew he couldn't continue. But he thought he was going to have resources with General Howe in Albany. This letter never makes it to him. So Howe, the general that changes his whole plan, decides rather than go to Albany, I'm going to use this time to take the Patriot capital in Philadelphia. Because that's where the Second Continental Congress is held. And in this time, taking, and really in any time, and this is why the events of last week are a big deal, is in warfare, when you take over a country's capital, that typically means that you have, I guess, taken the field in a sense. You've won, you've taken over, you've squashed the government, and you're placing your government in charge. So that's why symbolically taking a capital is a very big deal. So that's what Howe wants to do. He's like, if we want to get this war over with quickly, let's go ahead and take Philadelphia. So he takes he reroutes, and if you look at this picture, this was the route he was supposed to take. This is he ends up taking. So he gets into Philadelphia. He meets Washington. Washington puts up a good fight at Philly, but ultimately he loses. But he does inflict a lot of casualties for the British, but we just lost our unofficial capital. And the British get to stay there all winter now. This is in September, end of September, early October. They've taken over Philadelphia. Congress has fled. They believe now that Congress can't function, even though they've got the Committee of Correspondence, so they're still able to talk decently. But Howe now gets the luxury of setting up winter quarters in the town of Philadelphia, which is going to be a lot better than Valley Forge, where Washington's going to have to set up, which is about 20 miles out. Anybody go to Valley Forge Elementary in Huber? Nobody?
I did.
You did. So we'll talk about Valley Forge tomorrow, actually. All right, so Hal goes rogue. He takes Philadelphia, and even though in the scheme of war that's a good decision, not a good decision if you're Burgoyne. Because back in New York, remember Philadelphia's in Pennsylvania, back in New York, spies, you have a decision to make. So if you're a spy, pull up your Google form. And this is the scenario that you're in. You are taking on the role of a spy named Alexander Bryant. You have volunteered. You have become friends with Washington. You're a local tavern owner. And you've agreed that you can cross enemy lines and get some intel about the British and send them to Washington. Like George Washington. So you've got to make that you're a likable guy. Honest, a tavern is basically a bar, and bartenders are usually very easygoing, very easy to talk to, and he's gained the trust of a lot of British soldiers. And then he says, you know what? I'm going to join the British Army. I'm going to join you guys. Like, I'm going to fight with you, just so that he could get even closer and get even more intel. Meanwhile, they've got this spy ring going on, and they're getting that intel to Washington and any other commanders that are in need of it. But now you know that Burgoyne is getting desperate. He's running out of supplies, and he is about to make a fast, not getaway, but get to Albany. And you need to warn General Gates. You need to make sure that General Gates knows it's happening. So you've got two options. You can wait because you don't want to be another Nathan Hale from Long Island to get caught, because you need this message to get there. So you're going to play it a little safe, and you also don't want to give up, your position to the British. If you run away, they're going to know that you're a spy. So are you going to just wait for your spy ring to get organized and then get the information, or are you going to flee camp and go let them know? All right, I see lots of answers. If you chose A, you're going to wait. You don't want to be another Nathan Hale. That ends up not being a great decision. This is dire information that needs to get there. We're getting to this point of the war where we're just throwing Hail Marys. We got to have a win. We got to do what we got to do, no matter what the consequences are. And this is Brian's Hail Mary. He ends up escaping the camp. He is going to be chased, but he's able to get to Gates in time for Gates to kind of fortify a city right outside of Saratoga, which is a few miles up from Albany. And he uses the intelligence he gets from Bryant in order to make this decision. There are some people that will credit him for actually being the reason why we end up winning Saratoga. So you can see just by points, morale's high, supplies are high. So those of you that are doing guided notes, really the only thing you need to know is that the spy flees the camp and lets Gates know coming. And that's just a picture of Hale. Remember, I'm going to share this with you, so don't worry if you didn't get something. All right, so Burgoyne, just as Alexander Bryant let him know, begins to march or continues to march to Albany. And he ends up in a clearing at Freeman's Farm. At Freeman's Farm, he runs into that large force of Americans that are led by General Gates. Some that are hiding, kind of using that guerrilla style, hide and shoot. But then they're also ready to go toe-to-toe. And then remember those soldiers that ran away from Fort Ticonderoga? Remember I said don't count them out. Not only do they make the trip through the wilderness a lot more difficult for Burgoyne, they also join the army in Freeman's Farm. So now we are actually outnumbering the British in a battle, in a major battle, 2-1. Burgoyne is going to be forced to retreat. There's no technical winner. We definitely do better and they retreat, but they're not ready to give up yet. But if you remember, Burgoyne is like really running low on supplies. So he knows he's got to make a move here. He can't just be trapped here, especially for the winter, because he's got no way to get reinforcements. And at this time, by this time, he realizes that it's a lost cause to believe that Howe is coming. He's going to have to fight if he wants to get out. So he begins to fight. They fight the Americans at a new location called Bemis Heights. The Americans aren't doing all that well, actually. And then out of nowhere, Benedict Arnold courageously leads a charge against the British. So literally shows up out of nowhere, comes from Fort Swanks, and he is headed into battle, straight into battle. Officers, you have a decision to make. I'm going to go through this decision kind of quickly, which actually it's a pretty easy decision. Usually if you get the last decision, you get the easiest one. So your scenario is you're fighting the British in this battle. It's not all going that well. Out of nowhere comes Benedict Arnold. He's leading a charge. Are you going to follow him and have your men follow him and just go for it? Or do you need to make sure that Arnold has good intentions here? So what are you going to choose? I think this one's a pretty obvious one. Yeah, remember at this point I said we're Hail Marys. We're just going balls to the wall. So if you chose to follow him, that is the right decision. Arnold leads in a battle. We do end up winning. And it forces, 10 days later, it forces Burgoyne to surrender. Now, Benedict Arnold is going to eventually become what we call a turncoat. And one of the main reasons is because Gates, who was supposed to be leading this charge but was kind of losing, ends up taking all the credit for this win. And Benedict Arnold gets like no credit for it. And he even gets hurt and he still gets no credit. And that's going to kind of sour him towards Washington and towards the, Americans. And he's actually going to end up joining the British Army, selling us out. But he really, really helped in Saratoga. If you chose to wait, there's no time to wait in war right now. You get the benefits of the win, but you weren't there doing it. So those of you taking the notes, what really happens, Benedict Arnold shows great bravery. He becomes a national hero at this point. And we win the battle. 10 days later, they have to surrender. And this is a big deal. This is the first time a major army has to fully surrender to an American force. Some of his men are taken as prisoner. Others are just sent back to England and they can no longer fight in the war. And this is where Burgoyne's going to end up going on trial for surrendering. But what this does, the news of Saratoga makes France almost immediately make the decision that they are going to help the Americans, and they're going to announce that they're going to help. They're going to send soldiers. They're going to send more supplies. They now have an invested interest in us winning this war. We're going to see Lafayette, my Hamilton fans, Lafayette, who is French. He'll make his way to Washington's camp at Valley Forge. So this was kind of that push that the French needed to say, all right, you guys might be pretty legit. It literally legitimizes the Americans. So in conclusion, yes, we lose Philadelphia, and that's a huge hit. You never want to lose your capital. But we get this very decisive win, and we have a whole British regiment that surrenders to us. And that's going to help us secure French support. So in the long run, yes, they have Philly, but we got France now. Now, that's not a guarantee that we're going to win just because the French say that they're going to help us out, but it's definitely a start. So they credit Saratoga as being a major turning point in the war because it's the first time we see a regiment just surrender to an American force, at least a large regiment. And we gain the French's support. And the French are going to be instrumental in us winning battles, especially in our southern campaign and in the Battle of Yorktown. All right. So I'm going to post this. I made it just in time.
Right. Right on the money.
Post it, and
Woo! There's a battle here.